I'm Kevin Davis, and this is the Catholic Family Podcast. And we're very happy for you all to be along for the ride as we talk about society and the collapse thereof, due in large part or mostly to God being, well, left out. And before we get started, I would love to thank my dad, especially for having put together the intro for this and so much work that he has done for the Lent Around the World series. I can't thank him enough for all the work that he has put into that. It's been a beautiful series. If you've had a chance to listen to it, we are still looking for contributors. So if you want to contribute to that Lent Around the World series, please email me at kevin89davis@gmail.com. Please like, share, subscribe to this channel. We are trying to get people to talk about and listen to interesting topics, and of course, as well as saints. Almost not every day we produce content that has saintly matter. We talk to priests about theology, and here today we're talking about society and culture. And we're joined by Kenneth. Kenneth Dobbs is a teacher. He is a history teacher from the U.S. I forget which state. We'll get an introduction from him here in a second. He has also written a book actually about this exact topic. So he is our expert today. The rest of us, we're not experts. We are just a bunch of guys having a conversation with Kenneth. I'm joined by Frankie and Cory, who have also been on the show before. Thanks so much to those two for joining us. And Kenneth, I want to send it straight to you and maybe give a brief introduction of who you are, and let's just kick it off talking about the collapse of society as we see today. Look at the craziness around us. Do I even need to give an intro about how bad society is, right? I mean, it's that bad.
Yeah, so hello everyone. My name's Kenneth Dobbs. I am from New Hampshire, but I'm a history department chairman in Massachusetts at a charter school. And I basically was raised in the Novus Ordo, went to Franciscan University of Steubenville. I went back and taught at a small Catholic school. Eventually read my way into Sedevacantism by reading St. Alphonsus Liguori. Had a major conversion towards that position, and then had to switch from that small Catholic school to the charter school, which was a crazy experience. And that all happened during COVID in 2020. And before that, when I was a Novus Ordo conservative, I wrote a book that I really don't recommend anyone buy because it's filled with, Novus Ordo conservative stuff. But it's called The Idea of God, and it's about how religion shapes and sustains civilization. And just as Kevin was mentioning, with the fall of civilization, I actually opened my book up with an experiment that took place in 1968, and it was by a man named John B. Calhoun. And he basically had this idea: what would happen if we could meet all of our physiological needs? So, if we could supply enough food, enough water, enough living space for society, what would happen to its inhabitants? And so they did it twice, once with mice and once with rats. And both times the same thing happened. Instead of paradise forming, utter collapse occurred. The rats and mice stopped acting like rats and mice. They would no longer reproduce to have, children and carry on the species. They would have children and then leave them to die. They would stop performing their survival instincts. They would start practicing homosexuality. They would form groups that would attack other mice and other rats, until eventually there was a group that was involuntary celibate, and they lived away from society, and those were the only ones left that survived. They were the last ones to survive. And then the society extinguished because they refused to continue the rat and mice species. And so, what we can get out of that is that we're not meant to live purely for material goods. Like, the struggle of life and the striving for a goal actually is what makes us human, and it's what makes animals animals. When you take that away from them, when you just pump them with material goods, it actually destroys their nature. And so it was a controversial experiment, and a lot of different sociologists and psychologists had different things to say about it. But when I heard that, it fascinated me, and I had to do more research on how is that possible. Like, if religion is just a fairy tale, then that experiment should have worked. Like, those rats and mice should have created a paradise, but it didn't happen. It collapsed in on itself. And so, through further research, I basically connected St. Augustine's City of God with that experiment. And this also ties into a podcast that was featured on the Catholic Family Podcast just this past week on true happiness. And when I was listening to it, I actually realized, well, that actually has to do with what I wrote the book about. So St. Augustine said that there's use and there's enjoyment. That's basically a rough translation of his original meaning of those words. But use is things in this world. We eat food for another purpose. We don't eat food in and of itself. Enjoyment is what we should enjoy or strive for in and of itself. And so, what happens in civilization and societies due to sin is that people start to enjoy what they should merely use, and it messes society up. And that's when people stop worshiping God and they start worshiping themselves, or they start worshiping food, or they start worshiping sex. And that's what actually causes the collapse of civilization. So he wrote City of God in response to the collapse of Rome. It started to fall. He didn't fully see its total collapse in 476, but he saw it get sacked by barbarians. And Romans were asking, how could this happen? Why did this happen? And he actually answered it for them. Well, I'll tell you, it's because we're sinners and we're not actually worshiping God and living according to our human nature. And so basically, St. Augustine came up with this a long time ago. Psychologists and scientists are starting to catch up with where St. Augustine started. And there's plenty of studies on top of Calhoun's mouse utopia experiment. There's also a man named Abraham Maslow, and he developed this idea called the hierarchy of needs. And so basically, it's a pyramid shaped hierarchy, and at the bottom are the physiological needs, so food and shelter, and then going up from there are your familial needs and social needs, so friends and family and love and support. But then, even if you have all of, and also wealth and doing well in your job, but even if you have all of that, people are still depressed. They still don't find meaning in their life. And so, this largely secular psychologist developed this understanding of be values, which means being values, which is truth, beauty, and goodness. And that goes at the top of the hierarchy above everything else. And he identified traditional religions as filling that role at the top of society. So while he disagreed with traditional religion, he understood that it's vital and necessary for society to function properly and for individuals to function properly. Um, so I guess I can keep going, but does anyone have anything they want to throw in or interject just so they don't have to listen to me talk or keep talking?
Yeah, I mean, that mouse and rat utopia experiment I find incredibly interesting because, I mean, obviously barring some notable exceptions with, certain areas that are poorer than others. It's very similar to the end of the Roman Empire and to today. In at least Western Europe and North America, right? And obviously, I appreciate I'm putting a blanket statement there, but it's very certain that at least we see the fruits of that experiment. People going crazy, forming gangs, worshipping themselves, drugs, their stomachs.
So, are you basically describing Birmingham right now, Frankie?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, where I'm from is a city called Birmingham in the West Midlands of the UK. It's like the Detroit of the UK. So it's not the best. So it'll always be home. But anyway, it's beside the point. I was kind of stunned at that experiment because I'd never heard of that before. And wow, how accurately does that describe the state of modern man today? Yeah.
Yeah, if I could actually jump in as well, based off what you just said, I have it at the end of the chapter. I'm probably not going to be able to find it quickly, so I'll just go off the top of my head. In California, the bubonic plague, and I think it was cholera. I might be wrong with that second disease, but they've returned to California because of the excess amount of feces located in the streets. And so when I think of this mouse and rat utopia, I actually think of California. Like it's totally acting out in real time with human beings in a city, just like it did for the mice and the rats. And it's just a built into nature. Like if you live for these lower values, the physiological at the bottom of the hierarchy, it messes you up. It's not how it's supposed to be. So yeah, I just want to reiterate that if it's happening in the UK, it's happening in the United States most certainly, and we see the return of these third world diseases into these supposedly enlightened first world cities.
Well, right. If I could jump in right here,
Yeah.
I think that shows how bankrupt of a system classical liberalism is, and our post French Revolution system is, which is a system based on man can naturally perfect himself instead of God perfecting man. So when we have these people thinking that they can perfect themselves naturally, we obviously see the results of that is, well, a collapsing society such as California, which is secular and has no basis with religion.
Yeah, I'm very glad that you pointed that out because that was a big moment of realization for me, like a red pill, if you will. I don't know if you guys use that parlance or if that's cringeworthy, but understanding that liberalism actually destroys society was a very tough thing for me to swallow because I was like a red-blooded American. You know, Novus Ordo conservative in America. That's like America, and then JP2. Like that's who I am. Like even though that doesn't really make sense, that's just who I was. And to realize, wait a second, by not having a true religion in society, that actually destroys society. Like my mind had to invert in on itself. Like basically, I had everything the wrong way. The way I thought about society is an anti-culture.
Yeah.
And basically, there's a guy who describes this. His name's Christopher Dawson. Are you guys familiar with Christopher Dawson?
Mm-mm.
No.
He's a historian, a Catholic historian. Unfortunately, he went along with the changes of Vatican II, so no one's perfect. But he wrote a number of books that helped me write my book. And he has one called Religion and Progress. I actually have it back here. And it talks a lot about what we've already just mentioned. And he says, it's a great quote. Every society rests in the last resort on the recognition of common principles and common ideals. And if it makes no moral or spiritual appeal to the loyalty of its members, it must inevitably fall to pieces. So the First Amendment of my country is literally what tears countries apart. By saying that we have no common religion and you can believe what you want, that actually destroys society. And I was like, whoa.
I think for me, it was quite easy to end up rejecting liberalism because the country that I grew up in, obviously it wasn't as much as part of the culture as in America, but my family's historically Irish, so Catholicism was always there culturally, if not religiously, when I was younger. And throughout the history of the British Isles, you can see very much how the state religion influences the population, because that's the nature of things, right? The superiors form their subjects, not the other way around, and they get influenced by their superiors. So England was a deeply, deeply Catholic country when Christ was enthroned as king of the society, essentially. And the moment it became Anglican, it fell by the wayside bit by bit. It didn't happen overnight, bit by bit. That was largely through the sin of human respect, I think, that the hierarchy in England fell. But you also see in France, in America, and in many other places, when the state ceases to give the example of the true faith, then citizens fall away very quickly, because that's the nature of original sin. People are always tending towards the evil. And if there aren't certain laws which compel people towards the good and away from the bad, then they're going to fall into the bad. So I think that's very poignant observation by yourself.
And is this something that I tend to link back a lot to Martin Luther, because he was the one that really opened up this idea of it's all good, we can do whatever we want, just try believe in God, and we can sin and do everything we can. And to me, I guess that would be where I tend to link the collapse of society, or the society reached its peak before Martin Luther, and then it has been in a decrescendo ever since. I guess that's kind of how I seem to see it.
Yeah. So the way you just described that is actually the traditional way of studying history. It goes all the way back to before Christ. Like Polybius wrote about the rise, the golden age, and then the collapse of society. So you mentioned society reached its apex. That's a traditional way of viewing history, but we've gotten that stolen from us. Like, I went to public school as a child, and the way I was taught history was against grand narratives. Oh, there's no way you can understand all these events in the past. It's basically like a splatter paint image, and you can just admire certain parts of it, but there's no overall message. There's no overall meaning. And that was a very like postmodern and relativistic way of looking at it. But it's actually totally against the study and tradition of history. Every civilization, every culture has a rise, a golden age, and a collapse. And I think, sadly, to your point, Martin Luther basically kickstarted the collapse portion. The fall began, like the apex started to dip with him. And what most people would consider to be the golden age of the West, which is the supposed Enlightenment, is actually the catalyst of the collapse. It brought all of the values that disintegrate and rot society into the West.
So, Kenneth, are you saying the Renaissance was the golden age?
That's a great question. I always tell my students when they try and, well, I don't necessarily talk to my modern students. I told my Novus Ordo students when they tried to pin me down, like, well, when is the golden age of the United States? Or when is the golden age of the West? I always say that you can't actually tell the golden age until the collapse is over. And then you can look at the whole picture and say, oh, okay, that was most likely the golden age. But I think it would be appropriate to say that the Renaissance actually is the golden age leading into the collapse because of the cultural achievements that were attained during the Renaissance.
I would personally disagree with you. I would actually say that the golden age of like intellectuals was under St. Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah,
And that was the golden age. And I would say the collapse of intellectuals was the Renaissance. And we've seen a gradual increasing collapse ever since. And we saw like a crescendo collapse with the Enlightenment, if I could make that kind of analogy. But I don't think society collapsed until the French Revolution. And when the errors of the French Revolution spread throughout the world, that's when we saw the Western civilization is dead. We're in a post-Western civilization now. We're in a post-Christian civilization, in my opinion, because the prevailing religion nowadays is political atheism. Everyone wants a neutral state. They don't want a Christian professed state. If you try to challenge someone and say, "Hey, we should have a Christian state," they'll be shocked with you. They'll start getting dogmatic, as it were, and they basically show that their religion politically is to keep this false virtue of toleration of all beliefs.
Yeah, I think it depends on how you look at it. Like Christopher Dawson basically explains the golden age as the max production of cultural achievement and output. So I would probably say that the Thomas Aquinas was the end of the rise portion and the start of the golden age. And as that progressed, we still kept having amazing cultural achievements, amazing works of art, amazing architecture, but it started to corrupt. And that's what happens during the golden age, because people stop living. They start to stop living for what they're meant to, and they start to just enjoy the world, which is what we saw in Renaissance humanism. The movement, the rot started to begin during the apex, but it just depends on how you look at it and parse it out. I don't have any problem with saying that Thomas Aquinas is the apex, and then it started to dip with the Renaissance. That's fine too. I don't think we've actually experienced, like, the French Revolution happened, and that was a collapse of the French society, but we haven't actually had the collapse of liberalism yet, which
I would say there hasn't been a physical collapse, but there's been an ideological collapse.
Totally. Postmodernism is essentially post-liberalism. Not that we agree with postmodernism, but it kind of shows ideologically it's already starting to break down. And I actually just want to point out that this has all happened before. Like even liberalism, and the belief structure of liberalism has already come up in the ancient world. There's an example that I want to point to in my book, but it's just a part of history, with the Persian Wars and the Ionian Revolt. Basically, in ancient Ionia, which is basically Near East, like Turkey, they revolted against Persia. And then Persia...
Was that the revolt that basically caused the war with Athens between
Exactly.
Athens and Persia? Okay.
Exactly. And so basically right before the revolt happens, a foreigner steps up and tells the Ionians, you guys got to start getting prepared for war. Like, you're still like having all these, you're doing all these gross sexual acts and gorging yourself. You need to start sacrificing and hoarding your food and start doing military training, or the Persians are going to wipe you guys out. And so he starts having them place quota, like rationing food, doing really harsh military, like disciplinary training, and they last a week. And then the Ionians say, we would rather be slaves to the Persians than defend ourselves. Like, let us live how we want to live. We're not hurting you. Let us do our own thing. And he was like, are you guys serious? And then Persia came in and enslaved them. And so they were slaves to their passions, and they would rather be slaves to their passions than fight and sacrifice for their freedom. And so liberalism is this idea and mindset that freedom is doing whatever you want, but that's actually license, and it leads to slavery, moral slavery, but also physical slavery eventually, in the case of the Ionian Revolt. So yeah, I actually think that you're bringing up really good points, Cory, about liberalism and the Enlightenment. And I just want to reiterate your point has actually happened before in history, and we're just repeating largely the same mistakes that have already been tried. It's not actually new. It's old, and we just forgot that we tried it.
Nothing is new under the sun.
What's that?
Nothing is new under the sun. I think I just quoted
Right.
Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, totally. So I don't know if we want to transition now. There's a few more things I could point out about how these ideas have happened before in culture or civilization, and then move on to just purely the theological aspect of the encyclicals and the basically the Pope's teaching that religion is necessary for society. Would you guys mind if I just do a wrap up of the historical evidence of religion being necessary for civilization?
Go right
Go
ahead.
for it.
Totally.
Cool. So let me just wrap that up by just pointing out that if you go all the way back to Mesopotamia, they had something called the Divine Standard of Marduk, and they also had a festival of Akitu. And basically what they would do is they would treat their emperor to the standard of their god, a false god at that, and we would call it a demon. But they still held him to a standard above himself. And so they would strip him of all of his emperor garments, and he would become the poorest man in Babylon. And they would parade him around Babylon, and they would actually slap him across the face until he teared. And then he would have to say all of the ways that he failed at living up to the standard of Marduk. And then he would be brought into the ziggurat of Marduk, which is basically the central worship space of Babylon. And then he would be crowned and established as the emperor, and the society would forgive him for all the ways that he failed. And that was the unifying principle of the Babylonian empire. And then the same thing happened in Egypt. There was something called the principle of Mayet, and that's spelled M-A''AT. And basically that was the divine standard for the pharaohs to live up to. And if they didn't live up to it, then they would basically be bad pharaohs, but they'd also could potentially be removed from their office and status as gods if they didn't live up to that divine standard. In Greece, obviously, there was Logos, and Aristotle talked about the common good. So it's this principle and concept that is above everything else, and it acts as the order of morality that we see in the universe and in political offices and systems. In Rome, they had something called piety, which we have as Catholics, but in Romans, they understood it as doing your duty in the correct hierarchical order. So they had it as well. And then obviously medieval Europe had the Catholic idea of God. But really quickly too, there was also in China, which was geographically isolated from the rest of the world, they actually had something called the Mandate of Heaven, which was very similar to the divine standard of Marduk and the principle of Mayet, which their emperors had to live up to. And they even developed a system called the dynastic cycle, which is basically what Dawson described of the rise, golden age, and collapse of a civilization. And they also had it in the geographically isolated Aztec Empire, which obviously they had ritualistic cannibalism. So I'm not saying that they're like something to emulate, but they even had a divine standard and unifying principle for their civilization. So this is a universal human need we find it in the divine social kingship of Christ. And that's kind of what I want to transition the conversation towards and hear your guys' thoughts on how we as Catholics have the correct and true understanding of this human need of a religious apex that informs the rest of society.
And even I would actually even ask, before we get to that, I have an interesting question, because as we see the society collapse now, and are we saying that society has been collapsing for 800 years if we go back to St. Thomas Aquinas? So that gets a bit to be a bit extreme, right? And I think that if you look 150 years ago, look at the Industrial Revolution and things that have happened since then. I mean, the inventions, that there have been incredible things built and achieved. Now, have they all been good or beneficial to our souls? I'd say probably not, but they have been beneficial to the progression of mankind, I suppose, or the modernizing thing, whatever you want to call it. And so why is it that I guess as the technology or whatever you call it has gotten better, we've achieved much more in 150 years than I don't know, the 1,000 years before. Why has our why have we left God? Is it directly related? Is going away from God related to technology or the Industrial Revolution?
Well, Bishop Sanborn has talked about this multiple times. Sorry if I
No, go for it.
But I just want to point out that Bishop Sanborn has talked about this multiple times. You'll see it throughout history that the more prosperous people become, the less religious they are. But I think another problem that we're seeing today is because of the divine chastisement of Vatican II. I would say Vatican II is a chastisement. Because of that, there's no guiding. Because Christ does not have a visible vicar on earth, society is going to collapse even further into liberalism. Collapse ideologically, I should say, not physically, but the physical collapse is coming. Don't worry about it. If I can say that. But I guess I just wanted to throw that out there before we start getting more into that. I just wanted to these thoughts.
Just to expand on that, that reminded me of something that I once read from St. Alphonsus. He has a sermon about the number of sins beyond which God pardons no more. Terrifying sermon. If you want to reform your spiritual life, read it. In any case, St. Alphonsus says that when someone, in this case, I'm applying this to society in general, but he says that when someone goes and commits more sins, eventually God will abandon him into his sin. And that's worse than if God had just struck them dead and go to hell then, because their pain in hell is increased by the multitude of their sins and their gravity and so on and so forth. When the divine chastisement of the council came, when the church found herself deprived of authority, society went even worse. Because, I mean, imagine if we had a true Catholic Pope that would, intervene on certain issues and teach the faithful, things like that. I think things would be a lot better. In terms of the moral state of the world. And instead, society's fallen even quicker. It's been like exponential since the 1200s, I would say, or since the Renaissance. Like, it happened very, very slowly. And there have been certain events that kind of catapulted it. The Reformation, you had World War I, which I think was really important in terms of modesty and women working and things like that. You had the Enlightenment, which I neglected to mention. And then finally you had the Council, which was the real World War III, because it killed so many souls. So yeah, I think it was really exponential. But yeah, I just wanted to expand on what Cory said there with God abandoning society into its sins, and eventually God will come again with what Cory mentioned to be physical chastisement. And if we are to believe what some people say, the reign of Mary and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to think about Christendom as its own civilization, and I don't think anyone would disagree. Maybe we would, but I don't think anyone would disagree with the statement that Christendom is actually gone. Like, it doesn't exist anymore, sadly.
The question is, when did it not exist? Do you put the stop point at the Treaty of Westphalia, or do you put it at the French Revolution?
Exactly. So I think we're actually talking about. So to Kevin's question was, well, society's been collapsing for 800 years. it depends on which society we're looking at. The fall of Christendom sort of started with Aquinas, someone could argue, and it ended when? I don't know when we would put that date. So it seems like now we're talking about the fall of the liberal regime. It's a new society. It's a post-Christian world, and that's why these technological developments and whatnot. Maybe someone could say the golden age of the liberal regime was the Industrial Revolution, perhaps, or maybe the technological revolution was the golden age, and the Industrial Revolution was actually the rise portion. Who knows how we can parse that out until we actually experience the fall, the physical fall of the liberal regime. But did you want to jump in, Kevin?
No, sorry, itchy.
Oh, I thought you were waving like.
No, sorry.
Tap me in.
I think
so I just wanted to throw that out there, that it seems like we're talking about different societies. There's Christendom, and then there's whatever we want to call this hellscape that we live in. I don't know what word we'd use.
I definitely agree with you, Kenneth, and I think that it's actually interesting to note the difference between certain Western countries in arriving to that liberal landscape, because Ireland, for example, is a country that was largely unaffected by the Reformation, and then marginally affected by the Enlightenment. I would only say up until the early 1900s with the rise of nationalism, which, that issue aside, it had some ideas in it which were unfavorable towards authority, like with the American Revolution. And the hierarchy had to mediate that and try and tread a fine line. But even until the 90s, and obviously this is referring to the new mass, and I'm not endorsing the new mass or anything, I'm just referring to the general religiosity and goodwill of the Irish population. Until then, most people still went to mass, and divorce and contraception weren't even legal until the late 80s and 90s. Whereas on the other hand, if you compared America to that, or even parts of even France or Italy or anywhere, they were completely the opposite. Or some countries, I think, ebbed and flowed between them all. Like Spain and Portugal fell quite deeply into liberalism in the 1800s and early 1900s. And then with Franco and Salazar, you didn't exactly see, a restoration to what was before, because they had certain nationalistic and certain liberal ideas. It wasn't like the Catholic kings of the 1400s, but you saw some kind of restoration of some Christian order, which kind of stopped, at least for a time, for a few decades, the advancement of liberalism into their societies. So I think, I just thought it would be interesting to note the difference between different countries as they advanced from Christendom into liberalism and went a bit back. I think the line is kind of blurred, I would say. I don't know if there's one specific point for the whole of the West,
Just to keep going off what Frankie's saying here, you will see in history with those countries that return to some semblance form of Christendom, such as Franco's Spain or Salazar's Portugal. Well, another country that we forget about is Austria under Chancellor Dollfuss, who unfortunately was murdered by the Nazis. He actually died asking for, I think it was viaticum. But unfortunately, with a lot of these countries, they were still infected with liberalism. They were infected with the ideas of the French Revolution, and I don't think they fully understood how they were infected. And I think part of this divine chastisement of Vatican II is to show us that, is basically to wrench out all the bad fruits of liberalism that have infected the tree of Catholicism, basically. And that's basically what I'm kind of summarizing what Bishop Sanborn has said in the past there.
Yeah, agreed.
Nice. Yeah, and I think that's a good place to move on, I think, to the topic of, I guess, what's the question? Where do we go from here, I guess? And we're talking about two different cultures, as Kenneth said earlier. We're talking about Christendom, we're talking about Catholic culture, we're talking about us, how we can affect, where we live and what we can, do, I suppose. But there's also the world that's continuing to collapse. And I guess maybe, Kenneth, I mean, where do you see now, if you look at history and you look at society now, as we see people, you see the plague in California, is this something that's going to exponentially just go kaboom? We're going to have war, we're going to have famine, and then we're going to have a better time. And from that from the hard time will come strong men in a better time, and then
Oh, Kevin, I would be
renewal.
very careful with that, because that rhetoric comes from neo-pagans, and it doesn't come from Catholic historians. So I'd be very careful with that. All right, when you talk about weak men and strong men and that kind of thing. So I'd be very careful with that kind of stuff.
But it's I'd say it's probably accurate, that right?
No,
I mean,
well, I would say it's somewhat accurate, but I think the correct argument would be sinful men create evil times, but virtuous men create good times.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Kenneth.
Yeah, I think everyone, if you haven't, I mean, I've never read the whole thing cover to cover, but find the selections of St. Augustine's City of God, like his introduction, for instance. The introduction is pretty short, and he talks about the rise and fall of civilizations. And basically, the entire City of God is about that. What should we do when the regime that we live in falls? Because no one thought Rome would ever fall. It was the eternal city. Like, it's always gonna, it took over the world, like, basically, world, like the known world at the time, and it fell. And for some people, that was the end of the world. They actually thought during the time of Gregory the Great, St. Gregory the Great, that it was the end of the world. Obviously, that's after 476 and the fall of Western Rome, but still, they thought they were living in the end times because it fell. And so we think we're living in the end times, not because of the fall of the United States of America or, Britain, like the British Empire, but because of the spiritual attack that's going on the church. So I'm not saying all of us agree that we're living in the end times, but people are saying that now. We must be in the end times. This is the great apostasy. So there's a similar mindset going on, but it's with spiritual matters, not temporal or political matters.
Well, I think the worst part about these times, Kenneth, if I can just keep going off what you're saying here, is not only are we seeing a collapse of Christendom physically, but we're also seeing the spiritual collapse, which is Vatican II, and that's why we keep saying end times, because we've never seen, on one hand, the collapse of the social reign of Christ the King, but we're also seeing a mystical crucifixion, if you will, of the authority of Christ's church.
Yeah, that's what's kind of terrifying about it, is when I study the fall of these civilizations, I'm like, well, that's a man-made institution. Of course, it's eventually going to fall. Becoming a sedevacantist was kind of scary because the church can't fall. But it seems like almost the French Revolution happened in the church, which was a very difficult thing for me to wrestle with and grapple with. And it still is to this day, to think about the mystery of iniquity, which is what St. Paul calls it. It is a mystery, and it's very complicated to try and meditate on and come to grips with. But that's what we're living in now. And I think the way out of it for us is to basically approach it like St. Benedict did, by just having good Catholic homes and actually keeping Christ as the king in any way that we can, because we can't stop the collapse of the spiritual collapse of the church that's happening with the great apostasy. We can't stop it. Only God can. What we can do is make Christ king of our homes. Reach out to a clergyman to get your house consecrated to the Sacred Heart and the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and teach your children that Christ is the king, opposed to all liberalism and all liberal ideas. Buy this book. Sorry, 1 second. Buy this book for your children and your family, The Popes Against the Modern Errors, and have either yourself or your family read from it. Read what real Catholic popes had to say about these issues. It changed my life reading Pope Leo XIII's Libertas, and his understanding of true liberty versus false liberty. If we can do that as Catholics, we'll survive just like the Catholics who lived through the fall of Rome. They had to do it. It was very difficult. Granted, they had a Catholic hierarchy, but still, we can do it in our own sense, because sometimes the popes and bishops were prevented from, using their authority in certain regions due to political reasons or the collapse of civilization and society. That's what we're kind of living through. We don't know, or we don't have a pope, and we don't know if there is a bishop out there with ordinary jurisdiction. So we just have to do what we have to do as Catholics, and that actually will have eternal ripple effects just by us being Catholic and having Catholic homes and finding traditional Catholic masses where they're available. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on what we can do in this valley of tears that we're living.
I'm actually going to start at the thought for Frankie, because I actually want him to go to a specific spot here. I think in order to sanctify our souls, we really need to focus on mental prayer. And I think Frankie would love to talk about mental prayer and just a simple way of doing it, because I know you've been gung-ho about that, Frankie.
Yeah, I will jump into mental prayer. I just wanted to add before that, it is very easy to become discouraged in these times. But I personally find it a big consolation to remember that the church started with 12 people, the 11 apostles after Judas left and Our Lady. And one of the greatest proofs of the true church and of the divinity of Christ is the miracle of the church's propagation. And I see today how many young people, by the grace of God alone, have come from non-Catholic or even anti-Catholic families, and have not only found their way to the Novus Ordo, not only found their way to traditionalism, but have found their way to sedevacantism, or however you want to call it, And I think that's a great grace and a great proof that God continues to sustain his church and is preparing it for a restoration at some point in the future. When that be, God only knows. But yes, mental prayer. I'm a big fan of St. Alphonsus, just like Kenneth. And he says that it's necessary for salvation, because mortal sin and mental prayer, he says, cannot coexist. Either you give up mental prayer or you give up mortal sin. So if you're stuck in some kind of mortal sin, this is the way to go. Basically, the general principle is you start with preparation, acts of faith, hope, charity, asking the grace of the Holy Ghost to be with you. And then it comes with the reading of some pious work or meditation. I will always recommend Preparation for Death by St. Alphonsus. Always have, always will. And then once you've found something that's worthy of meditation, it could be 3 sentences in, you spend a good while turning it around in your head, and often pious aspirations will come out of this. So if you meditate on the crucifixion, you'll often get a good sense of contrition for sin or love of our Lord. And then you can start to petition our Lord and God the Father for certain graces, most poignantly the graces of final perseverance and a happy death. But also it's important to pray for the church, friends, family, enemies, relations, all things like that. And then you can make a resolution for the day and ask the grace of the Holy Ghost to be faithful to it. So that's, as quickly as I could, a resume of a resume of mental prayer and how to do it. But yeah, no, I do think it's very important to make sure that Christ is the King of our hearts first, because we're blessed in the sense that, unlike ancient Rome, for now at least, we're not getting killed for being Catholic. I can go and be Catholic and say whatever, and usually it's fine. There might be some problems here and there, but I won't get killed for it, unless, in the West anyway. And if the Christians of ancient Rome could do it then and Christianize a whole empire, which is crazy. I actually live not too far from where Emperor Constantine was crowned the Roman Emperor, which is pretty cool. In York.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. In York. And so if they could do it then, I'm sure we could do it now with the grace of God. Obviously, we don't have a hierarchy, which makes things just a little bit more difficult. But even in England during the Reformation, papal authority was essentially unable to be exercised obviously not through any lack of the authority, but through political circumstances. And Father Chicago, God rest his soul, he did a sermon and various talks on things like this. There were actually rival mass centers set up between Catholic clergy in England. So you'd have the Jesuits on one side of the road in someone's house, secretly saying mass, and across the road you'd have diocesan clergy doing the same thing. So it's funny to note that wherever papal authority can't be exercised, there will always be conflict.
Father Chicata said that the Jesuits and the secular clergy would constantly fight each other over which masses people would go to and that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, exactly. So I mean, like, it's kind of like, it's like how Cincinnati has a plethora of different traditional masses and things like that. But without getting into it, point is, it's happened before. So we're not totally alone. Different things in the crisis have happened at different points in history. So it's just important to pray for the grace of the virtue of hope, because that's something that a lot of people can easily fall into lacking, owing to present circumstances.
And I think that that's something that we all, as you say, I mean, we first of all is trying to work on ourselves and perfect ourselves, that's in our families. But I think that in our time, we do have a time, as Frankie said earlier, there are so many young people who are searching for truth and tradition and good culture, and they're trying to get out of the festering stink hole that is, you know, they say California, you know, and people, I think there are people who see it. And I think that there are plenty of people searching, if it's on social media or if it's your neighbor down the street. I think there are more people than we realize. And so first of all, obviously it comes in how we act. I mean, how we talk to people, how we, you know, are we drinking too much? Well, whatever. I mean, really try to be Catholics, but I really believe it's time for us to truly proselytize in this time where we don't have much of a hierarchy and we don't have nearly enough priests. And for goodness sake, the priests that we have can barely do the bare essentials. I mean, truly barely do the bare essentials, and they're being forced to teach, etc. I mean, it's incredible what they do. I think it is on us. I think we need to take a bigger role in evangelizing in a way. Now, does this mean going and thumping a Bible or standing at a street corner? No, probably not, because we're not priests, we're not theologians. But if it is that little conversation, that nice little nudge of, you know, hey, you know, I'm a happy guy. You want to know why? You know, because I've actually got it figured out. Maybe, you know, I may be an idiot, but for goodness sake, I at least have the faith. And I think that if we can share that with people, it's great.
Well, Kevin, just to go off what you're saying here, it's easy as just picking up an apologetics book and just studying that. And in fact, I would love to start a apologetics group at my church where we just we teach each other, you know, apologetics, us young guys or something like that. But you know, my chapel, there's a lot going on, so I don't think that's going to be a thing for quite a while now. But just having that idea of learning how to defend the Catholic faith and using that in public life is something that would be quite useful for young Catholic men and women.
I think what Kevin said about just little conversations is really important as well, because I became a Catholic when I was 14, and I went to what is basically public school in the UK. So I was in the Nova Ordo for a year and a half, but regardless, there's lots of opportunities for conversations to open up just because people would ask, because if they knew you were Catholic, they'd ask something, right? Whether it was about something silly like the sex abuse scandals in the Nova Ordo, or if it was actually like, why did you become a Catholic? Or I had one guy, actually, we spoke about Pope Leo XIII's encyclical that Kenneth mentioned, Libertas, which I was like 15, but it was a good little conversation. Or even the other day, I was stopped by some Mormons on the way to university lecture, and probably a bad decision on their part. But they asked if I wanted to join their Saturday basketball group. I said, I don't particularly play it, but in any case, thanks, but no thanks. They asked if I was religious, and I explained yes, blah, blah, blah. And they asked me why I was a Catholic. They weren't rude or anything. They were lovely. They're American, actually. So I don't know what they were doing in Leeds, but
they're doing American things, Frankie. They're doing American things.
Yeah. Is basketball big in Birmingham?
Oh no, not at all.
So that was the sign right there. It's like, are you a Mormon or are you American?
No, they were wearing the suits and the signs and the name tags anyway. But I just explained our Lord very clearly founded a church, apostolic succession, blah blah blah. Point is, when you live in the modern world, you're inevitably going to know secular people. Even if you live in like a hub of traditional Catholicism, like Brooksville or Omaha or Spokane or wherever, you're going to encounter secular people, and just little conversations here and there, not necessarily promoted by like you wearing like a Vatican flag all over you or something like that. But if they know you're Catholic, they'll ask you on at least some point. And little conversations, planting a seed, the grace of God can water that seed proverbially. And I think that's a great way to bit by bit rebuild the pieces of a broken society.
Totally. And also to network, it's something that I'm really trying to work on too here. And what I love having you three guys on. I mean, different backgrounds, different places, different countries, for goodness sake. You know, I mean, in some little different beliefs as well. But I mean, to be able to have conversations and to be able to, have good topics to discuss to broaden our knowledge of the faith, of history, and as Cory said, of apologetics. I mean, I think that's a great idea to have a men's group at a church. I mean, heck, why don't we have a men's group that meets online, you know, once a month or something to talk about apologetics? I mean, this is we are the, you know, Christ wants us to be the light of the world, and if the Catholic society is going to flourish, which I think it can, then the men, probably especially the young men, have to take that by the reins and say, let's do this. And I think that's what we got to be active about. And I think Cory's totally on it. If it's, and I think if there's apologetics, it's maybe better to have a priest on board as well. But if we could get a priest to be in that chat, which we all know plenty of priests, maybe if they can take turns, you know, and be, hey, today we're going to talk about this. I think that's such a good idea. And I think that'd be so helpful. And I mean, even just having catechism brush ups is a great idea.
Basically, just just a very basic apologetics course could just be a very basic catechism. Honestly,
right?
That's all you need.
Right.
That's all you need for apologetics is basic catechism.
Yeah, I think actually, I think it's really good for young Catholic men just to have a network of young Catholic men in general towards help, you know, in the sense of help building up a sense of community and helping traditional Catholics occupy important places in society, whether it's doing well in your job or whatever it is. If we can kind of help each other out where we can, I think that's a good thing. And I also think it helps a sense of fraternity and camaraderie that is nigh on impossible to maintain in a really full Catholic manner in today's day and age. I mean, we'll all have secular friends from school and things like that, but there's only a certain extent to which you can make a proper connection with them because of what they do in their spare time or whom they're with and things like that. So I think
I just point out a quick interject on that. Like, I think we all, maybe some people listening aren't, but I'm immersed in secularism in New England area of the United States. And one thing that has become commonplace is people using our Lord's name in vain. So one easy way that you can evangelize without even having to get into the thicket of like apologetics and stuff like that is when you hear someone that you work with say our Lord's name in vain, just don't maybe do it right away. Wait for a calm moment one-on-one with them and bring it up to them and say, hey, could you not do that in the future? That actually really hurts me as an individual. And because most secular progressive people are very aware of offending people, they actually respond very understandingly, and they're like, oh my gosh, why? And then you can tell them, oh, well, I'm a Catholic. And they're like, you actually care about that? Like, and then they'll tell you, I was raised Catholic. Like, and then it starts a whole conversation. And they actually, they're curious. They're like, why does this person care about this? Like, I've never met someone who is offended by that. And it does it in a way that's not like confrontational. It's actually more like, because I'm your friend or because I'm your coworker, I'm asking this of you, not in like an annoying way, but just as, could you just not do that? And it starts like a great conversation. I've done that with the person I share an office with. And then we had a whole great conversation. He told me that he's a Stoic. I had no idea that he reads philosophy.
That's kind of based, actually.
Sorry. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, with other coworkers, they've revealed to me, oh, like I used to be Catholic and I'm not anymore. So that's interesting that you actually care about using the Lord's name in vain. Could you explain why? And so that's just one thing I would like to throw in based off what Frankie was saying. Being around secular people, that's one way that we can get our foot in the door.
Well, I actually want to just say a quick point. Father Philip actually gave me an examination of conscience PDF, and one of the prayers in that examination of conscience was when someone says the Lord's name in vain, you can say, "Blessed be the name of God." And there's an indulgence attached to that, but I don't have that.
That's beautiful.
I don't have the exact facts on that, but just saying "Blessed be the name of God" when someone says that the Lord's name in vain is also good.
Yeah, a few years ago, I read a blog post by none other than Dr. Marshall in like 2018 or 19, back when I was still in like the Novus Ordo or just leaving it. And he recommended to say a glory be when that happened. So like over the years, I've developed that habit. It can kind of be a pain to say it if you're in the middle of something, but you can, wait and say it later or something like that. But definitely making a small act of reparation is an excellent thing. Or if you have access to the sacraments, offer a communion of reparation or something like that every once in a while, I think can go a great way to appeasing divine wrath and, making some satisfaction for the sins of men as well as your own.
Well, and I think it's such a good point by Kenneth too, that it's also a good way to get in the door, and it's something that we see. Look at the Mormons. It's a great example. The Mormons walking down the street, and you see a Mormon, you say that's a Mormon, and I think and unfortunately, I mean it's kind of a joke, right? But they're known to be Mormon because they're polite, they're extremely nice, they always dress very well, and they talk about their faith, and it's like, that's interesting. It becomes a punchline, but it's like, wait, shouldn't we dress nicely and be polite and
talk about
our faith? I mean,
Yeah.
it's really the case. They do a better job than we do. It's just true, guys. I mean, we Catholics we get so buried in this idea of meekness. Christ said to be meek. Yes, this is true, but it doesn't mean to go and bury yourself in a shell and go and you go to the restaurant and make the sign of the cross so no one can see it. I mean, for goodness sake, look at the evil people in the world who are just parading around in sin. Why are we the ones hiding?
Yeah, I actually want to point out too. One time, my wife and I were traveling, and we make it a point to make the sign of the cross as big as we can. That was actually something Dr. Marshall also suggested doing. So as wrong as he can be on certain issues, he's right on with stuff like this. And so we did that, and we also blessed my infant son. Like we had him do it with us. And then a couple on the airplane who saw us do it, or in the airport, wherever it was that we did it, they stopped us when we made it to our destination, and they said, "We love that you did that with your son. That's such a great example." And we had no idea that anyone could even notice that we did it. So you would be surprised who you will have watching you while you do that. And if you do it very ashamedly almost, that will make people be like, are they scared of being Catholic? Do they not want people to know? So yeah, I just want to reiterate that point, that is also a great way to get people to see that you're proud of the faith and that you love God. And they'll ask you questions about whatever. They'll feel like they're sometimes people are looking for someone like that to talk to. So that is a sign, literally, that you are Catholic for people out there that are looking for the truth. So I just wanted to reiterate that point.
Oh, and I think that then the next step, as we talked about before, is then being prepared apologetically, at least with the basics, so that if that conversation comes up and someone says, "Oh, you're a Catholic, why?" You're not like, My parents were. It's nice. I like the Latin, and that's we had a podcast about that too. That's a whole different topic. Obviously, the idea of people are Catholics because they love the beauty of it, or they love the Latin Mass, and they love the incense, and they love the choir. All amazingly beautiful things that do come with it. But that's not what makes Catholicism. Obviously, I mean, it's part of it, but it's not everything. And I think that, again, that's so important to be prepared for that, and to have at least the basic knowledge in your mind of Catholicism. And not everybody does. I mean, it's amazing when you have kids and you start to think, okay, I got to start teaching my kids catechism, and you start looking through the catechism books, and it's kind of like, whew, I haven't done this in 25 years, 20 years, I guess. It's crazy.
I definitely recommended it as a good habit to at least skim through a catechism book every year. I think that'd be a very good practice for the laity, in order to just skim through the catechism and just see where your pain points are and misunderstandings of the faith. And also, again, when you're talking to people and they ask you why you're Catholic, it's so easy. It's just say, well, Catholicism is true. You can just leave it at that sometimes. Because it's as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. That's all that needs to be said sometimes. And I think some people overthink, and they say, well, I don't know. But you can just say, because it's true. And I think that's where a lot of young people need to realize you can say that. You don't have to be scared of saying that. It's the truth, and you adhere to the truth, and just say it's true.
Yeah, people are impressed by confidence. People follow others who have convictions. I mean, that's just absolutely the truth. And if you're convicted in what you believe, then people will look to it and will follow it. And I think that Kenneth, I want to break a little bit here, and I've got to ask you, because we're probably coming towards the end of the show. Have you thought about rewriting your book, in terms of, now that you've changed your mind, or are you thinking about writing another one? Because I think it's a great topic. I mean, I would love to read your book. Maybe you'll have to send me the link, because maybe this is what you can do. You can X out the chapters that we should avoid, the modern theology or whatever.
Cross out Saint John Paul.
Exactly.
If I think were to write another, I'm actually, I am kind of, even being here right now, I had to pray about it, because I'm almost gun shy now with that mistakes that I made that were published in my name. I was like, ugh. And I also wrote articles that got published. But I can't change the past. And that's kind of, I'm not a cleric. I'm not a religious, that's where it comes down to, I almost don't want it to be a thing for pride. But if I were to write another book along this line, instead of the idea of God, which is what sustains civilization, and it's what we're all aimed to according to our nature, we're built to be religious animals, or beings, not necessarily animals. I would write the opposite, and I would probably call it the bottomless pit. And it would be about what are the values that destroy society. So instead of writing about here's how Mesopotamia used religion to have social cohesion, it would be here's how France utterly destroyed itself, and explain why the French Revolution happened, why the Communist Revolution happened, and basically look at all the societal collapses that have happened. Even going back to Egypt, there was an Egyptian societal collapse called the Intermediate Period, and people became atheist and started doing all sorts of...
Was that after the Sea Peoples?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
The Bronze Age collapse is similar to the first Intermediate Period, and that was in part caused by the invasion of the Sea Peoples. But it also had a social and religious element to it. So if I were to write another book, it would be on societal collapse in and of itself, not just the religious component. But I don't envision myself doing that, just for fear of making a horrible mistake and leading souls astray. So, yeah.
So even if you didn't bring, I guess, theology into, I guess if you're talking about God and the collapse of society, I guess you kind of have to talk about theology a little bit. Yeah, I understand that's tough, and it's it's a difficult thing in this realm. I get this all the time. I get plenty of emails telling me to be careful with what is said on these podcasts, and it is dangerous, and you do have to be really careful because you do have people listening. Your words matter, and people are listening to what you say. But I do think that it is important for us to do things, to write books, to do podcasts, to be political. Now, to do that, we need to be well informed. We need to be sure that we are, if we're political, especially, we better really be sure we know what we're doing politically, and that it's the right form of politics, I suppose. But it's really important to do. It often comes up in this podcast to be doers and not just thinkers.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll send it to Bishop Pivarunas. He
There you go.
can take a red pen to the my manuscript just to make sure there's no errors against the faith. But
Totally.
I think it was reassuring to read. I didn't get into because that's totally fine. But I wanted to point out Father Garrigou Lagrange and Pope Leo XIII reiterating that religion is essential for society and for civilization. So even after I became sedevacantist and realized like the theological errors that I had made in the book, including modernism is featured in my book, which is just so embarrassing to admit that. But it was at least reassuring to read papal encyclicals and Father Garrigou Lagrange that had key components of what I had to say. So who knows?
Kenneth,
Maybe I'll write
it must have been quite the change to actually read clear encyclicals rather than what John Paul II wrote.
I actually had an FSSP priest admit when I was in the middle of converting. I met with him before I went to the CMRI, and I basically told him, "Look, I'm really considering sedevacantism," and so I brought up these papal encyclicals that just go on and on and on and say nothing. And he said to me, I won't say who this FSSP prelate was or where he's located, but he said to me that reading JP2 and Benedict is like listening to like a woman who's very angry or upset about something. Just go on and on and on and on. And you're just waiting, like, get to the point. Like he said that verbatim to me. And I was like, you're talking about, like, first off, I'm telling you that I'm considering this theological position. That's your defense of your pope? Like, that's supposed to convince me to stay? And so, no, you're totally right. Reading a true papal encyclical is an amazing and beautiful experience. And I really want to tell everyone here, if you haven't read Libertas or you haven't read Mirari Vos, read it. Like, it will literally change your soul, because these are true pastors of the faith that just cared about human souls. Like, I think there's a mindset of people who come from the Novus Ordo where we're almost scared to read papal encyclicals because we've been exposed to the blather. Please, if you haven't, read a full papal encyclical, just one in your lifetime. It's an amazing experience.
And so if it's going to be one, do you recommend Libertas then, or what's the one?
An American, if you're an American who believes in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all that stuff, or excuse me, Constitution and the Bill of Rights are the same thing. Declaration of Independence, you have to read Libertas. Like, you have to, like, you can't, because we have been inculcated with these errors of liberalism, like from grade school. It's built into your brain, religious indifferentism. Like, I had modernism just given to me in a silver spoon. And so you have to, you're obligated to read it. Like someone like Frankie, he said that it never really was a problem for him. But if you're an American and you believe in those things, or you've been exposed to that, you just simply have to. That would be the one that I say you have to.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. I think that if you actually just sit down and like reason through it and think about it for a minute, liberalism really makes no sense whatsoever. Because, okay, take religious freedom or freedom of speech and press, right? Just the basic ones. You say, oh, well, okay, who do rights come from? God. And you're like, okay, well, why would God give the right to be a Muslim? I don't know. Or like, okay, say someone says, I believe in religious freedom. You say why, and they're like, why not? You know, there's really not much reason to it except putting God and the devil on the same level, and it's diabolic, really. So the moment you realize, okay, why not promote the true, and why not restrict what you know to be false? You know, we're not talking about like economic policy or something like that. We're talking about really clear-cut things that, okay, we know Catholicism is true, so why on earth would you want anything else in the public sphere or allowed in the public sphere or anything like that? And why would you not want to promote the truth? Why would you not want to promote something that's good and beautiful and things like that, you know? Because people are so preoccupied on GDP that they forget that there's something a bit more important.
Yeah, no, I 1000% like retweet that if I could. I'm actually not on social media for Lent, but yeah, tomorrow I will be on, and if you tweet something like that, I will retweet it. But no, error has no rights. Like when I heard that phrase or read that phrase in a papal encyclical, like it just like you don't have a right to be wrong. And like I never understood that. Well, I initially did as a child. Like I think I brought it up in grade school, and my teacher corrected me, and they're like, that's their opinion. They're entitled to their opinion. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. But no, I should have been like, no, like you don't have a right to be wrong. You have a right to the truth. And that's what Father Garrigou Lagrange actually writes in. Sorry, that was my son. We are a Catholic family podcast. But Father Garrigou Lagrange actually has a whole section, and I forget if I held that book up, but he has a whole section on the rights of truth and the connection between charity and truth. And so, again, I highly recommend if you have the money, please get this book. There's also a writing from Father Garrigou that says that phenomenology is basically the philosophy of modernism, and he connects the encyclical Presendi with phenomenology, and JP2 was a phenomenologist. So highly recommend anyone out there, if you have the money, get Philosophizing in Faith. I'll stop being a salesman now if someone wants to jump in.
I was going to say, no one paid you for that, right? I think he died. He died quite a long time ago. I'm fairly sure. I gotta say, Cory is getting some love in the comment section. So,
I will say in the comment section, the people who are saying mute Cory are actually a couple of my friends. So don't. So yeah, don't worry.
So we should mute you then.
Sure, that'll get them going. That'll rile them up.
Nice.
Well, I actually wanted to bring up a book. I think an important political philosophy that Catholics adopt is actually the political philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas. He actually has a whole bunch of political writings. This is a Cambridge edition, I think, or just Cambridge texts where they put all of his political writings all together. I think it's really important that Catholics follow his political philosophy. That's just my opinion, though. I don't know if the church has adopted that. I think Pope Leo XIII said that the church is indifferent, but I think that's probably the greatest political philosophy you could adopt is the one of St. Thomas Aquinas's.
Interesting. I have honestly never heard of that. We've talked on previous shows about what was it, the one with, was it Chesterton and Belloc? But it's actually something I want to have another show on that exact topic about what is an actually decent form of government. And as you say, it's not actually defined or anything by the church, but I think that it's a really good topic because as we have been talking about over and over now, the idea of democracy and liberalism they're pretty weak. And it's something that as Americans, we look at, we are taught from day one that if you deny any piece of Americanism, you are a heretic, in terms of as an American. And we're all, I mean, I think Americans, I love about Americans that we are patriots. Americans love their country. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But I think Kenneth said earlier, make sure that what you love is not in error. So you can love America and you can love things that America does and parts of it. But make sure that you don't love things that are wrong.
There are politics. Sorry, I
no, go ahead.
off there, Kevin. But
Okay.
There are politics in the world that Catholics can respectfully disagree on. But what we cannot disagree on is the disordered ordering of society that rejects the social kingship of Christ. We must essentially agree as Catholics that society must profess Christ as the king of society, and we must have laws that enshrine the rights of the Roman Catholic Church, and we must have laws that basically laws that enshrine that. Basically, I'm kind of rambling on now, but that's practically what I had to say there.
No, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and if whatever that form is, and I'm absolutely convinced that it's not fascism. So anyone asking about Mussolini, please don't bring that up.
Can I also
go ahead again.
Jump in and say that people should not speak badly about our Holy Father, Pope Pius XII. Like, I see people saying in the comments, like, oh, he did sketchy things from 53 to 58. He was the Pope. What he legislated, and we know that the church with a valid Pope is indefectible. So we probably shouldn't even go there. So I just want to point that out for anyone who's questioning his magisterium. We can't.
Attacking the authority of the Pope is actually kind of liberal sounding if you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to laity talking about a pope, it's better to just, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I mean, I think that applies pretty much as a general rule of charity. You know, it goes back to like elementary school, but I think it's a good rule of charity. But especially when it comes to the Vicar of Christ on earth, Catholics are supposed to venerate him and have a great devotion to him. So let's just leave criticism to future popes, if there is any to be made at all. That's not for me to say. Definitely agreed with you, Kevin, on fascism. It's a revolutionary idea. I think a lot of young men are drawn to it because they always have like strong men in there. And it seems really cool and edgy and things like that for there to be like hard lines against what we could perceive to be common enemies like sodomy or the extremer forms of liberalism and things like that. But the reality is that it's just not the way forward. It's based on a false revolutionary idea of nationalism and things like that, beyond a healthy love of country, and subordinating the interests of the church to the interests of the state is just not an option for Catholics.
Basically, fascism is the replacement of the social authority of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And that's why young men are so drawn to it, because they want to be told what to do, and they want the truth to be told, and they want a proper authority to tell them what to do. And so that's why they're so drawn to fascism. But obviously fascism is false because it exaggerates the state and turns the state into an idol pretty much. And that's why we should reject fascism, because it's an extreme form of nationalism that goes against the very virtue of patriotism.
Cory, I actually have a great quote that summarizes what you said the last time you spoke before the fascist comment from Libertas. And this is quoted by Garrigou-Lagrange in his article. And he says, society as such must recognize that God is its author. It must respect divine authority. Justice forbids, indeed reason forbids, that society be atheistic, or what comes to the same, that society equally receive all religions and grant them all the same rights. So you were mentioning that the government has the duty to make sure that error is rooted out and that the true religion is worshipped. So I just wanted to link that to.
That's perfect. That I probably read that encyclical 6 months ago. So I great tie in there.
It's a good thing to have in your subconscious.
Just to link back to what Kenneth Riley said about the Holy Father, Pope Pius XII. I don't want to jump back into that too much, but it's just I saw someone say that the Holy Father lost his office in 1956 because of the Council of Trent. I'm guessing he's referring to the liturgical reforms or something, but it is entirely within the right of the Roman Pontiff to alter the liturgy in any way that he sees fit. He never promulgated anything that was against the faith. The entire Catholic world recognized him as the Pope, and he continued exercising his office as the Pope right until the end. So, yeah, no way on earth you could say that. In fact, Pope Pius XII's papacy specifically is a dogmatic fact because he promulgated the dogma of the Assumption in, I think, maybe 53 or 54. I think it was 54. So if he wasn't the Pope or anything like that, that throws a whole dogma of the faith into question. So his papacy in particular, as well as that of Pius IX, is of capital importance. So that's just not something you could say at all.
Yeah,
Right.
a great talk by Bishop Pivarunas, I believe it was the providence of Pope Pius XII's magisterium, or something along those lines was the title. And
wasn't that a Marian conference, Kenneth?
Yeah, it was. And it was an amazing talk. He basically goes into everything Pope Pius XII, not everything, but a lot of the things Pope Pius XII did that actually is extremely providential considering the sedevacante that has occurred since his death. So please don't bash Pope Pius XII. Like, and if you are, listen to that talk. You have an obligation to listen to that talk.
And jumping back to the comments, I see from Moira, what about Catholic integralism? I actually am not familiar with that term. Do any of you of you know that?
I'm somewhat familiar with that term. It's a Catholic movement, basically a Catholic action movement. It's more popular in South America, and because of how right wing it is, a lot of people think it's fascism, and I guess there was some mixing with some groups. So there was I don't want to say with certainty, but there was some problems there with Catholic integralists mixing with fascists and phalangists. But Catholic integralism is a good thing because it's trying to use the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas. But if it's used improperly by the wrong people, that's where you fall into fascism. I don't know if Frankie wants to talk about it, if he's read anything about it, but
yeah, the issue is when Catholics get too involved in politics is that in the modern age, it's very easy because all of us have had our minds formed to a greater or lesser extent by modernity and by the French Revolution. So it's important to take extreme care when we try and venture into these things because it's so easy to venture into something like fascism. In and of itself, integralism is not against the faith. It's just the principle that the Catholic faith should be the basis of public law and policy in the state. So in and of itself, that is, it's in accordance with the faith. It's what we should believe. But yeah, it's when it comes to like political affiliations, if you get too involved, it can be quite easy to get mixed into the wrong circles because there isn't just like a political Catholic action movement like there used to be in like the 30s in Spain. So it's just the theory of Catholic integralism itself, perfectly orthodox. It's just the idea that the Catholic faith should be the standard for morality in society. That's what we have to believe, really. But you just have to be wary with the people with whom you're associating.
And that's a really good point. Real quick, sorry, I listened to a podcast at one point from Bishop Dolan, and it may have been an old one, but he talked about getting too involved with even organizations like pro-life organizations. Now, obviously, we are all, of course, we're pro-life. That's not even a question. And these organizations do a lot of good things. But if you get too involved with them, you start to affiliate yourself with them, and almost surely they are. Maybe, I mean, who knows? Maybe they're Baptists, maybe they're Novus Ordo Catholics, but it's a pretty dangerous path. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you, as Frankie said, exactly, you really got to be pretty careful when you involve yourself with these organizations because they don't hold all of the things that we hold to be true, and sometimes they hold 90%, but that 10% is all that actually matters. And so that's a really good point by Frankie, and I think that's another reason why I think that we need to try to start more of these initiatives on our own and try to do things with each other. If it's going on pro-life marches or organizing pro-life marches or prayers or whatever it is, because then, okay, well, I hope we can trust ourselves. We can trust that we have the right intentions and that we're not going to be led astray by some organization or especially some political affiliation.
Yeah, I wanted to point out that 1 Peter 5 actually released an article calling Pope Leo XIII the first liberal pope. And I nearly lost it when I saw that. And
that was the worst written article I've ever seen, Kenneth. I just want to put that out there.
I don't want to be uncharitable, but I mean, their basic argument was that because Pope Leo XIII prudently didn't he didn't endorse a particular movement and condemned people who wanted to say certain political systems or groups were the way to go, that he was a liberal. And it's like, no, he's just being prudent, and that's what Holy Mother Church does. So and that ties into what Frankie was saying about integralism. Integralism in and of itself is perfectly orthodox. It's the praxis of how to incorporate it that's when things start to get a little complicated.
Just to interject, obviously I've heard that before as well. A horrible accusation. His Excellency Bishop Sandborn has an excellent article called "The Pendulating Papacy," which goes into why people wrongly say this. But basically, because they're really using wrong terms. You should never criticize a true Catholic Pope as a liberal. He was quite clearly an anti-liberal. But in the aftermath of the French Revolution, there was kind of never a division in terms of doctrine, but just in terms of praxis of how to apply it. So you had people who were called, I believe, so you had the anti-accommodationists, for lack of a better word, who didn't want any compromise in any sphere, political at all, with the people with the French Revolution. But then you had the
modern world,
the modern world in general, and then you had accommodationists who were completely and totally and utterly Catholic, but they thought that by potentially seeding some political reform. So, for example, I think Pope Pius IX started out as an accommodationist, and he wanted to appease them by letting there be a lay ruler of the papal states. As they were crowning that lay ruler, he actually got assassinated and had his throat slit, and an army overran Rome and did horrible, unspeakable things to nuns and sacred vessels. And so he became...
Was that Garibaldi, I think?
Yes, Garibaldi. Okay. And so Pope Pius IX became the complete opposite way, and that's where Quanta Cura and other things came from. But point being, that all aside, Pope Leo XIII was an accommodationist. He was not a liberal. He was totally Catholic, but he, in his prudent mind at the time, thought that this would be a good way to go about re-Christianizing society. In my personal opinion, I think that history has proved that anti-accommodationist popes right, but that's not for me to judge. It's just a complete personal opinion. But in any case, the Holy Father was definitely not a liberal in any way, shape, or form. None of the debate between the two involved the Catholic faith. It just revolved around praxis. How do you re-Christianize society?
Awesome. Yeah, guys, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just want to say one last time that Father Garrigou Lagrange actually has another article called On Royal Authority, and it's basically just explaining the tail end of the discussion we just had. He goes into the different forms of political systems and then explains, what the church's stance is and why the church doesn't force society to be a monarchy. It can be a republic or it can be a democracy, but there are certain things that have to be met. So the church is just very prudent in that regard. That's all I wanted to say.
No, very good. And I think that it's I don't know if it's a good place to wrap it up, but we got to wrap it up at some point. I mean, right. I've really enjoyed this conversation, guys. I mean, I think that there's been some really, really great stuff covered. Fascinating. I've learned a lot. I've got several things I got to go read. Maybe it's a little late here. It's approaching midnight. But if I stay up another hour, then I can go have I can go have some chocolate or something. So that'll tempt me a little bit. But guys, I really appreciate it, and I think I'll send it to last words if you guys want to talk about really any of the topics that we mentioned. I think I'll send it to Cory first. If there's just anything you want to say, any shout out, whatever you want.
Well, I just want to shout out to young traditionalists everywhere across the world. You guys need to step up and fight. I'm not saying you go out and burn something down, but I'm just saying you go out, meet people, talk to them, pray a rosary with them, maybe read a book with them. Go meet new traditionalists, people that are converting. Be careful with the guys who are crazy, but that's just prudence right there. But young Catholics, go out and be Catholics, live the faith, and don't be afraid to live the faith. And then I'm also going to end with a brief litany of prayers to saints. King Saint Louis, pray for us.
Pray for us.
King Saint Heinrich, or Emperor Saint Heinrich, pray for us. And then King Saint Edward the Confessor, pray for us.
Pray for us.
Amen.
Frankie, last words?
Yeah, so more or less similar to what I said at the end of the last time you had me on. Keep the faith, daily rosary. I'll add this time daily mental prayer, but always maintain the traditional Catholic faith and never lose hope that one day tradition and authority will be restored in Rome. And it's not over just yet. So always have faith that eventually Christ will win, because we know that he's already won. So yeah, stay faithful to the Catholic faith, to your rosary and mental prayer, and to good Catholic clergy who are working very hard for us. Thanks for having me, by the way.
Awesome. Kenneth, last words?
I guess I would just like to say thank you for having me. I'm glad that when I made the decision to become a Sedevacantist, it wasn't like I had to buy a bunker or something and be totally alone. Like, I have normal people who are like me, relatively normal. And I would like to just apologize if I said anything wrong. That's all me. Anything true or good or beautiful that was said, that's most likely from God. So praise God for that. And I just want to say again, thank you all. And I hope you have a great night or day, wherever it is that you're listening.
Perfect. Kenneth, thanks so much. Seriously, I'd love to do this again with you guys. I'm sure there's endless topics that we can talk about. Let's go. I mean, seriously, I would love to dig into this encyclical Libertas. I've never read it. I'd love to read it. Maybe we can all come on again and hash it out, because I think it's so valuable. It's such a good topic. Frankie, maybe you can sit that one out because it's not as important for you. But anyway, but it is really valuable, because I think Americans need to get over some of the ideas of what they think is patriotism, what they think they love, but for the betterment, for the betterment of themselves and their souls, and for the betterment of our country, for goodness sake. And so, my last words, obviously, please like, share, and subscribe. If you enjoyed the show, share it with your family and friends. What we're trying to do here at Catholic Family Podcast is just create good content that anyone can watch, listen to, and be edified by. And we hope that we can continue to do that in the future. If you want to support the show, if you want to help us have better streaming services and not so laggy and whatnot, you can support us over on Patreon or on PayPal. But we're always improving. It's one step at a time in terms of technology, but it's a slow process. But thank you, everyone. And again, for anyone who wants to contribute to the Lent Around the World series, we do need people to read. Again, it's just a short little excerpt from your favorite meditation. There have been really some beautiful ones so far for anyone who's listened, from all around the world, from India, from Australia, from the US, from all over the place. So please contribute to that. You can send that to me at kevin89davis@gmail.com. Any other questions you have, if you have an idea for a show, hit me up at kevin89davis@gmail.com. Frankie, Kenneth, Cory, again, thanks so much. And until next time, and always, God bless.
God bless. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, guys.